Today, Denver International Airport is the largest in North America, covering a surface area of 52 square miles and sporting the longest public-use runway in the world at 16,000 feet or 3 miles in length, this facility being a superb feat of architecture, topped by its iconic Teflon-coated fiberglass roof that mimics the snow-capped peaks of the distant Rocky Mountains, and provides a vital hub not only for the mile-high city, but also many major and regional destinations across the Midwest United States. However, prior to this airport's opening in 1995, the city was served by a more centrally located facility known as Denver Stapleton Airport, which became a victim of its own success, as due to the increasing demands of airlines and passengers on the aging field, the only solution was to close down and start afresh elsewhere, and now barely a scrap remains to show that the area of Stapleton was once host to an international airport. Stapleton Airport was the brainchild of the man from which it takes its name, Denver Mayor Benjamin Stapleton, who served the city for 2 terms from 1923 to 1931 and from 1935 to 1947, Stapleton, during the wake of World War I, seeing the rapid expansion of air travel across the United States during the 1920s as a huge potential boon for Denver when it came to benefiting from this new mode of transport. At the time, Denver was already a major railroad hub for several companies traveling from east to west, though with the city being positioned strategically at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, it appeared ideally set to form a vital stopover on the Midwestern air corridors between Chicago and the West Coast. Prior to the proposed new airport, Denver had been served by a series of small informal strips that had been established within the surrounding region, including the Smith Road Field, which was first opened in 1911, an airfield at 26th Avenue, Lowry Field near 38th Avenue, and Denver Union Airport at 46th Avenue east of Colorado Boulevard. With the assistance of Denver Improvements and Parks Department manager Charles Vail, Stapleton first proposed the creation of an airport in around 1927, but faced early opposition from city council members and residents who argued that Denver had no right to build a facility that would be a commercial venture for the city. Regardless, Stapleton pushed through with his objective, siting the field at an area called Sand Creek, though it is sometimes referred to as Rattlesnake Hollow, a barren patch of land on the Colorado High Plains, 7 miles from downtown Denver, bounded to the north by the Roydale train yard, which was owned and operated by the Union Pacific Railroad. Originally, the facility was named the Denver Municipal Airport and comprised a single runway, hangar, and a 2-story administration building that was used by 3 airlines, Mid-Continent Express, Western Air Express, and U.S. Airways. The airport was officially opened on October 17, 1929, and following an inauguration ceremony that took place over 4 days, initial traffic to and from the field was slow to build, with a majority of flights being made up of postal services, though numbers soon picked up, and by the end of 1930, the airport saw 30 arrivals and departures per day, as well as an additional 3 airlines, helping the field secure an early profit for its first full year of operation. The airport therefore expanded in January 1931 to include a new hangar, while in 1937, United and Continental Airlines began to operate from the field, but passenger numbers were still dwindling when compared to mail flights by the end of the decade. It wasn't until America's entry into World War II in 1941, however, that the expansion of the Denver Municipal Airport increased substantially, with the aprons and runway facilities improved in order to house the Continental Denver Modification Center, which was used to retrofit Boeing B-17 bombers with the updated equipment needed for specific roles or theaters of operation. Prior to the conflict, the airport had several unpaved landing strips that had no formal designation, but the presence of the armed forces soon organized these into 3 hard-surfaced runways, 2 of which, the north-south and east-west runways, being 7,000 feet long, while the third, the northeast-southwest runway, was 6,400 feet long. On August 25, 1944, the airport was renamed to the Stapleton Airfield, and upon the end of hostilities in 1945, expansion of the facility continued rapidly, as advancements in technology helped to open up air travel to the wider passenger market. As mentioned, Denver's strategic location as a halfway point between Chicago and the West Coast cities of Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle meant it was ideal for fuel stopovers, and also gave rise to the new hub-and-spoke system of domestic air operation. Denver's airports, both old and new, have become the case-in-point example for the hub-and-spoke method of traffic planning, whereby it forms a central hub from which a variety of different services converge from multiple individual destinations called spokes, allowing for connections and interlining between multiple destinations via a single point. With expanded apron and runway facilities now available for use, Stapleton Airport's primary role on the main air routes between Eastern and Western America meant modifications had to be quickly implemented, with its original 640-acre site now increased to 1,435 acres, while air traffic had jumped to more than 50 commercial flights per day. By 1946, the airport hosted 1,200 employees, 4 runways, 2 flying schools, and 4 major airlines, together with a 3-story administration building, 6 hangars, a post office, a fire station, a 6-story control tower, a USO lounge, and a cafe. In that same year, an ambitious plan was undertaken to increase the passenger capacity of the airport further, with Denver Improvements and Parks manager George Cranmer unveiling plans to create a $1 million expansion to the field through the lengthening of the east-west runway and the construction of a horseshoe-shaped terminal that could be easily extended to suit the needs of the growing demand if required. Cranmer's aspirations, however, were not shared by the new mayor of Denver, James Newton, who considered the proposals too expensive, and that the perceived airline boom was unlikely to be centered on Denver, meaning that, without his investment in updated facilities, the substantial growth of the field was curtailed. Eventually, Newton was forced to relent following complaints by newspapers, local politicians, and airport officials, who had correctly predicted that air travel in the United States would grow exponentially, and thus the first wing of the new horseshoe-shaped terminal, which followed the main access road from Syracuse Street, was built and opened in 1954. This would be accompanied by another 4 wings, designated concourses, built between 1963 and 1988, each one housing the airport's primary carriers, although the airlines that served them would be changed throughout their operational lives. The increased size of Stapleton Airport meant that by 1955, over 1 million passengers were passing through its doors annually, and to help manage the dozens of flights per hour, a new 6-story control tower was built on the site of the previous one, opening in June 1953. Come 1957, the airport was now a hub for several major U.S. carriers, with United operating 38 flights per day from the field, Continental operating 12, Braniff, Frontier, and Western each operating 7, Transworld Airlines operating 5, and Central Airlines operating 1. The airport continued to go from strength to strength, especially following the first arrival of a jet airliner on May 6, 1959, when a Continental Airlines Boeing 707 operated from the field, but was only loaded at half capacity due to Stapleton's runways not being long enough to handle the aircraft. The city government and airport management, however, had predicted the arrival of jets as early as 1954, following the first flights of Boeing's Dash 80 prototype, and had placed an order for 2,520 acres of land on the nearby Rocky Mountain Arsenal to be used as part of an extensive master plan to lengthen the existing runways 8 left and 8 right to make them compatible with jets. At the same time, 2 new north-south runways, designated 17 left and 17 right, would also be built, these being located to the northeast of the terminal and would pass over the Union Pacific Railroad on an overbridge, though sadly, plans to extend the runways were halted by the newly formed Federal Aviation Administration in 1958, citing an overabundance of active development proposals at Stapleton Airport. After a year of debating, the city of Denver were allowed to use their proposed 2,520-acre master plan site on April 7, 1959, and by the end of 1962, the airport now featured 5 runways, 4 of which were able to handle jet airliners. The investment worked wonders, and in 1960 the airport was the 5th busiest in the world for aircraft operations, followed in 1961 by the airport being ranked 3rd busiest in the world in terms of passenger movements, complemented throughout the decade by a new 14-story control tower, 2 new concourses, extensions to the terminal, and the renaming of the facility to Stapleton International Airport in 1964. On July 11, 1961, tragedy struck when United Airlines Flight 859, a Douglas DC-8 arriving from Omaha, veered off the runway and crashed after the failure of the 2 port engines to generate reverse thrust, resulting in a significant fire that killed 17 of the aircraft's 122 passengers and crew, this disaster highlighting Denver's lack of firefighting equipment, and thus a 20-bed fire station was constructed. In the end, the Stapleton Airport Master Plan came to a total cost of $56 million, or $375 million in 2025, and had delivered 2 new runways, 2 existing runway extensions, new terminal expansions, 7 hangars, a new control tower, a fire station, and a 2-story parking lot, making Denver the gateway to Midwest America. Airline deregulation in the late 1970s further expanded the role of Stapleton as a major hub on both the domestic and international market, with both Western and Arrow Air introducing transatlantic flights to London and Manchester in the UK, in competition with established carriers such as United, Pan Am and American Airlines, while German carrier Condor operated a weekly service to Frankfurt. Low-cost carriers that emerged following deregulation also made an appearance at Denver during the early 1980s, with Southwest Airlines and People Express initially attempting to expand their services to the field in competition with mainstream operators, but had largely abandoned their proposals by 1985, with Southwest dropping their plans due to a lack of available apron and terminal space to accommodate them. It was during the 1980s, though, that numerous problems began to emerge as to the sustainability and location of Stapleton International, most notably the proximity of the field to downtown Denver, which, after all its expansions, was only 3 miles from the city, while the approach patterns for runway 8 left and 8 right meant that height restrictions had to be made on skyscrapers, with no structure being allowed to be taller than 715 feet. Further issues included the fact that the parallel runways were too closely spaced to accommodate simultaneous instrument approaches, which resulted in lengthy IFR separation periods during bad weather, while at the same time, the airport was facing numerous lawsuits by residents in the nearby Park Hill community due to noise pollution. Attempts to lengthen the runways further onto the Rocky Mountain Arsenal lands were legally blocked by the Adams County government and, most crucially, the barren region of the High Plains on which the airport had been built back in the 1920s, which was now the bustling suburbs of Montclair, Aurora and Northfield, with residential developments having been built right up to the perimeter fences. Therefore, come 1985, it was apparent that Stapleton Airport could no longer operate with such constraints, and thus a deal was reached with the Colorado General Assembly to annex a plot of land in Adams County into the city of Denver, whereupon a new airport would be built with a proposed opening of October 1993, the scheme being approved by Adams County voters in 1988 and by Denver voters in 1989. To tide the airport over until the new facility was completed, the infrastructure at Stapleton continued to be expanded at a cost of $250 million, or $1.6 billion in 2025, with the brand new runway 1836 being opened in 1985, and the final extension to the terminal, Concourse E, opening in 1988. As a sign of the increasing interest being made in both Denver and Colorado, traffic at Stapleton continued to grow even in its twilight years, with British Airways operating seasonal charters from London Gatwick and Martinair operating flights from Amsterdam, while other aspects of the field were removed in preparation for full closure, including the Continental Airlines pilot and flight attendant base in October 1994, making United the largest carrier. However, the final years of Stapleton were also marred with tragedy, as on November 15, 1987, Continental Airlines Flight 1713, as operated by Douglas DC-914 November 626 Tango X-ray, working a flight from Boise, Idaho, crashed on takeoff during a snowstorm, killing 28 of the 82 people aboard. Following an investigation, it was found that the loss of control was caused by ice and snow buildup on the aircraft, and though the DC-9 had been de-iced, confusion as to its position on the field during taxi meant the flight spent longer than normal on the ground in moderate snowfall before takeoff, the outcomes of the accident leading to new procedures regarding de-icing fluids and checking for ice buildup prior to takeoff. In the end, the curtain fell on February 27, 1995, when after 6 years of construction and multiple delays, the new Denver International Airport was ready to be opened, operations continuing as normal at Stapleton throughout the day, while convoys of airport equipment were shipped or driven through the suburban streets to the new facility. On the afternoon of the last day, a flypast was undertaken by United Airlines as a tribute to their Denver hub, the display comprising 2 Boeing 757s in close formation, 757-222s November 578 Uniform Alpha, and November 579 Uniform Alpha, both of which flew in the company of a Boeing 727, which performed the role of an air-to-air photography rig. The last departure would take place at 21:38 on the evening of Monday, February 27, 1995, when Continental Airlines Flight 34, operated by Douglas DC-1030 November 12061, was pushed back from the gate bound for London Gatwick, after which the lights were dimmed and put out forever at Denver Stapleton Airport. Upon the closure of the airport, all structures on site were gradually torn down as part of the Stapleton Development Plan, a scheme adopted by then Denver Mayor Wellington Webb and the City Council as an amendment to the city's comprehensive plan, which would see the former field transformed over the course of between 30 to 40 years into a new series of urban villages, employment centres and open spaces. The terminals and concourses were the first structures to be torn down, their need for demolition exacerbated by a severe hailstorm in 1997 that left over 4,000 holes in the roof of the building, followed by the hangar facilities and other ancillary structures. The last of the original airport structures to be removed was the multi-storey car park, which was torn down in 2011, but the airport's 12-storey control tower has been retained and was initially used as part of a punch bowl restaurant and social gathering spot, with the restaurant itself being constructed at the base of the building. In 2017, the tower itself was closed for renovation, the 1950s structure failing to meet the latest building codes, but the actual control room high above the Denver streets can be accessed through private tours, though otherwise, apart from the seemingly out-of-place presence of the looming control tower above the residential streets of suburban Denver, nothing remains to signify that the quiet neighborhoods of the urban villages once roared to the sound of jet engines.